educator for Wabash County, Indiana. My background is primarily in turf and weed sciences, so we're going to go through some turf basics. The information I'm presenting today is going to be very general. That's kind of how we have to do it with the half-hour presentation, which is a good thing because it gives you a starting point on, where can I go, what resources can I use. So I'll be giving quite a bit of information, but this will be recorded, so don't think you have to write down different seeding rates or different turf species because this will be recorded. And then I'm also going to have quite a few resources for you to jump back on, for you to dive into on a rainy day or a cold evening for those of us in Indiana. We're getting ready for some cold weather coming through. So if I can advance my slide here. So here are the learning objectives for today. When looking at your lawn or your turf grass, you want to define your expectations. That's a big starter point. Knowing your environment. So how much shade do you have? What sort of soil issues? What sort of soil characteristics do you have? And then moisture content is a big one. Picking the right species, that's another big one that I'm getting a lot of questions now where folks are either starting a new lawn or have some bare spots and they want to pick a grass species for those areas. So there are different things that we can look at to make sure that you're picking the right species for the right location. And then maintaining along, so we'll talk about irrigation, mowing, different things like that. And then observing lawn issues. I'm not going to get too into these because we do have next week's presentation, which focuses on weeds. And then we have our last presentation. I'll sort of be discussing our pests and diseases. Today is just thinking about turf and maybe asking a few more questions than you normally would when you're establishing or taking care of your lawn. So defining expectations, it's the top left of your screen, you see an image there. It's got dandelions that are yellow that stick out like a sore thumb. You've got some other broadleaf weeds like clover, maybe, possibly some chickweed. And some people are okay with a lawn like this, with a lawn that will be green, mostly green for most of the year. Yes, you might have some dandelions, but some people like those, whether it's for bee population. There have been some Facebook posts about different dandelion recipes, whether you're using the leaves or the blooms. So some people find those desirable. Or if you look to the top right picture, not as many dandelions. Some folks do not want that flush of yellow in the spring. We've kind of been seeing that around the state of Indiana, but less blooms means more green, more uniformity, and people often look for that sort of uniformity. And then on the bottom there, I've got a picture from the Purdue field day a couple years back. That is our primo, lots of inputs, lots of care, lots of time watering. They painted it, it looks great. That's, some people are looking for that, but just a word of caution, when you're looking for the golf course line, or the golf course quality of turf, you're gonna need to have a lot of inputs to that. So turf grass adaptation maps. This is a picture of the United States, and if you look at Indiana, most of it is in the cool season area, but the southern tip is part of the transition zone. When I say cool season, that means that the area is going to be best suited for cool season turf grasses. The transition zone is going to be best suited for either cool season or warm season grasses. And the transition zone, or I'm sorry, the warm season areas where warm season grasses will live. That's shifted a little bit because there have been better varieties coming out. So there's been quite a bit of research at Purdue University, which is sort of parallel to Indianapolis, so the middle of the state of Indiana. Zoysia grass is a warm season grass, and they're looking to see if they can get it to grow further north. So there are some warm season grasses that can grow a little bit north of the transition zone. But again, just looking at climate in general, knowing where you're at in the state, and it looked like we had someone from Washington where that would definitely be a cool season area just because of where you lie on the map. Knowing your environment. So I took this picture outside of my apartment. Some things that I look for when I'm looking at a lawn is, one, I see that big line of trees there. So shade is going to be a big issue. Do I need to account for that? Do I need to pick a different species? This is also on top of a hill. So when we do get rain, the moisture runs down to a ditch or a creek. So moisture is a big thing I'm looking for. And then the other thing is traffic. A lot of folks, if they have shade, sometimes they have a picnic table out there or the trampoline if the kids are out there. Traffic and shade are two strikes. They really don't do well in turf. So know your environment, what it's going to be used for. This area here is not very highly trafficked. So this is something where maybe it's not going to be as intensive to get things established. All right, now we're going into picking the right species. This is a screenshot of our Purdue Turf Center or our Purdue Turf Sciences webpage. This is one of the things where if you have some time, I'd like you to visit this because it has a lot of great resources. I've got the calculator, there we go, the calculator tab opened up, and you can see it has fertilizer calculations, turfgrass ID tool, turfgrass selection tool, sand calculator, and seed calculator. These are things that they're on the web. You can either Google Purdue turfgrass or just go to turfgrass@purdue.edu. I believe that'll get you there. But the web page is really great. It has all these resources. In terms of picking the right species, they have this turfgrass selection tool. And you end up clicking on that. And then it's a fun little program. You can change different things, what sort of conditions you're working with. So it has a little welcome. You click on the start button. And the first question is going to ask, what type of turf grass area are you looking at? And so most of us are going to pick the lawn setting. If you do have a lot of acreage where you're not going to be mowing as much, or if you have a large area where the road is, you can maybe click that utility turf, but that's going to be more for folks who are large contracted companies because they're going to look for cheaper seed and maybe not quite as expensive as a cultivar. So the second question is going to be select the shadiness of the area. Probably one of the most important distinguishing factors for your lawn. You can either click none, moderate, or dense shade. I clicked moderate on this one. And then you're going to select the desired turf appearance. So this is your choice. I know a lot of folks are okay with the low selection, which is the first option. And it just sort of has a description on what you're willing to do. So this is, you're mowing the turf, you're okay with it being a little bit brown, and you're okay with some weeds, which this, I would probably be in this area. I do like weeds in my yard because I can take pictures of them. I can use them for presentations and things. So I like weeds in my yard. Most folks though will land in the medium sector there, which as you can see, you're willing to mow, fertilize at least twice a month, and then control weeds, and then in severe drought, supplemental watering. So this is one where most of us will lie. On the bottom is the high turf. This is going to be somewhere that you might have a company coming in, they're spraying a couple times a year. You have an irrigation system, so you're watering during those hot spells. And again, trying to make it as uniform as the stand of turf. And then the next thing it's going to ask is where you're in which county you'll be at. So I'm in Wabash County, which is sort of the central northern part of the state. And then it gives suggestions of turf grass. For the sake of time, the different categories we picked moderate shade, moderate care, and so it gives us these turf type tall fescue options. Now, one thing I want to be careful about is when I say turf type tall fescue, there are many different cultivars of that. So you'll see a name in front of it that'll be Falcon or just some other name that the company has given it. So whenever I suggest for starters, for people who want moderate inputs for their lawn, I always or usually will suggest turf type tall fescue. This middle one does have the Kentucky bluegrass mixture in it. The Kentucky bluegrass is one of those that does take a lot of watering and fertilizer. So that's one where if you want to do a little bit more with your yard, I would definitely suggest putting some of those seeds in. And then at the bottom, you see fine leaf fescue. If you're planting in shade, fine leaf fescue is going to be one of the better options if you have shade in your area. And then I just went back, if you wanted a low desired, or select the desired appearance of your turf and it was low, what it would end up doing is it took away the option that had the Kentucky bluegrass. Now this is a big one. I wanted to really get through this. Shade tolerance. Fine fescues are excellent. Tall fescues are good. Kentucky bluegrass is fair, and zoysia grass and Bermuda grass are fair. The Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, those will be more for the southern part of the state, but they can do well sort of Indianapolis or a little farther north. But if you're looking in the Fort Wayne area or the Elkhart area, I would probably suggest not planting those, the zoysia grass or Bermuda grass. And then here we have fine fescues. So anything that is a creeping red fescue, a chewing fescue, a hard fescue, or a sheep fescue. So those are what you are looking for in shade. Here's one of those pictures that has a lot of information. Managing shaded turf, so shade tolerant species. So we're looking for fine leaf fescues. Pruning trees. Depending on how well I know the customer, I'll walk up there and suggest, you know, if you really want a good turf, the best thing you can do is cut down your trees. A lot of folks aren't willing to do that, and I understand that. So pruning is an option. Number 3 is a big one. Fertilization should be decreased in half. So if the plant has, you know, only partial sunlight, it's not going to be growing as much, so it doesn't need as much fertilizer. Mowing height should be increased. That's going to increase the surface area of your leaf blade, which will help collect what sun it can. Irrigation in shady areas. It's a kind of a double-edged sword because you could be in the shade of a house and it could remain very wet, but in the shade of a tree, those trees have roots and they are pulling quite a bit of water out of the ground. So you could be drying out in the shady areas. The interseeding of fescues under shade trees and lawns. Leaf removal, that's a big one. And leaf removal needs to happen in the fall because you might get a little bit extra growth once those trees drop their leaves. That grass might be able to get a little more sunlight. It might help beef them up for the following years. And then traffic tolerance is reduced. So if you have a picnic table or something, maybe put it in an area that's a little more has a little more sunlight to it. The next bit is just about seeding options. I'm going to kind of zip through this. The reason that this slide here is up is because it looks really good. It says, you know, professional contractors use it, quick grass coverage. It's got all the good selling points. I rarely look at the bright colors of these. I'm looking at the what I call the ingredient list for the grass seed. This is going to be the small tablet that's stapled to the bottom. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you all these names. You see at the top, Barrett, the Tracer, and the Falcon, and the Labyrinth tall fescue. This is one that has a lot of fescue seeds, so it's going to grow well. It's got some good variety to it. This would be a good lawn for those who wouldn't want to water or fertilize all that much. Just another contractor mix. The reason we bring this up is we have the Falcon tall fescue, and then you see this Gulf annual ryegrass and Galaxy intermediate ryegrass. Anytime that I see ryegrass, I tell myself, okay, things are going to green up really quickly, but those ryegrass cultivars rarely last for subsequent years. So I'm looking more for the tall fescue or the chewing fescue there at the bottom. Seeding rate, another slide with quite a bit of information, excuse me. The seeding rates, you can see the different ranges, anywhere from ½ a pound up to 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Days to germination, you see that second option where it's Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass. Days to germinate is 5 to 12 days. The perennial ryegrass is what's going to germinate in 5 days. The Kentucky bluegrass is what's going to germinate in 21 days. And then planting time. We're giving this presentation in May. You may still want to do some seeding, but you can see the best times to plant for your cool season grasses, meaning Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye, and tall fescue, are going to be in September. However, if you wanted to seed in the spring, if you wanted to seed Kentucky bluegrass, it will not work as well. Sod does work with Kentucky bluegrass, but you will be paying for that. Let's see here. Tall fescue and perennial ryegrass. I have suggested this to a few folks in my county. They had some good success, even though we did have some snow events and frost events. One of the things that we try to do is get it out somewhat early and get it established. March is a good time some years, but other years it'll be April. So we just try to keep it growing as well as we can. We can only do so much with the weather we're getting. And then crabgrass is a problem in seeding. I'm going to skip this. Seeding depth, just make sure you get good soil to seed contact. That means good bed preparation, whether it's tillage or aeration or something of that nature. Just make sure the seeds are hitting the soil. And if you are seeding, you need to add some sort of phosphorus to it, because this is going to be what helps get the plant going. Whenever people are reseeding, I make sure they look at their analysis. Here's a fertilizer brand. That first number is nitrogen, the 24. The second number is the one that we're looking for. That's going to be the potassium that we need for those new seedlings. And once the seedlings are emerged and doing well, you can back off and do more of a nitrogen-based fertilization program. And then erosion mats, I think these are great for hills. If you don't have a hill and it's more of a flat plain, straw works well. This is just a sort of mulch to, one, keep moisture near the seed and to protect it from exposure in terms of too much light, too much rain. It just does a good job of protecting those new seeds. And then past weeks, we did have pH testing and different information. All this is saying is that if your pH is too low, so the left of the graph there, if the pH is too low, then the nutrients are not going to be in a form that the turf can take up. So here's just a real simple scale. Optimum for grasses is a pH of 5.8 to 6.5. There is a little give to that, but for the most part, anything that the pH is above 6, you'll be fine. Aaron Patton with Purdue Turfgrass, this is his liming recommendation. If your soil pH, which you would find that out with your soil tests, you're going to add 25 pounds of lime per 1,000 square feet, but then you're going to retest. I know some people will think that, well, they just need to keep reapplying, but if you do have that pH problem, you really need to be vigilant and make sure you're retesting your soils. And then do nothing if your pH is greater than 6. So cool season fertilization. Again, this is going to depend on how many inputs you want in your lawn. You see there, the first bullet point, September is the most important. If you're going to fertilize, do it in September. This is when the plant needs a lot of nutrients to overwinter. It's going to promote good root growth. The second most important is going to be October through November. There are times where it's snowing in October and November. So as long as you get that September out, that's good. If you get the October, November out, that's going to be great. But the September is really the foundation that will help out. I try not to apply fertilizer past October 15th. Of course, I'm going to eat my words, and that means that October 15th will probably still be in the 60s, and it'll be a good time to apply that later this year. And then for cool season, May, the third application, that's the least important. It is still good to do, but a lot of people, when they're applying for crabgrass pre-emergent or other weed killers, they will throw in a fertilizer application so they can sort of kill two birds with one stone and get all that in one tank mixture. All right, warm season. So this is for the southern part of the state. Your summer months are when you're going to do those fertilization. If you fertilize back in March or April, those warm season turf grasses are going to be dormant or just be coming out of dormancy, but they're going to really need it in the May, June, July, and August. How much fertilizer to use? This is just a very simple calculation. Never more than 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Any more than that, you might get some leaf burn, which we don't want, especially if you're applying in late May. So 1 pound of nitrogen for late summer and fall applications. And then if you do that May application, anywhere from 1/2 pound to 3/4 of a pound. And then this is a big one. Know how large your area is, and then the fertilizer analysis. So I'm just going to go real quick through it's a simple calculation. If you look on that top analysis, you see nitrogen rate. That's going to be the rate that you want to get. So you're going to plug your amount into that nitrogen rate box. And then you're looking at how much per 1,000 square feet, 1 pound of fertilizer. And then the analysis is what you're going to get from the bag. And then the total lawn area is what you're going to calculate. So we see the nitrogen rate, we want 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. We've got 1 pound of fertilizer is 0.32 pounds of nitrogen. And this, for example, is a yard that is 5,000 square feet. So just to make sure that 32 or that 0.32 comes right here. So you're just going to multiply 1 pounds N times 1 pound fert times 5,000 divided by 1,000 times 0.32. So it'll be 5,000 feet squared divided by 320 pounds of fert, and that's going to give you the 15 pounds in your 5,000 square foot lawn. Mowing, this is a real simple rule. Instead of mowing every Saturday or Friday, if you want to be real good at it, you do the 1/3 rule. It's never remove more than 1/3 of the turf grass leaves with a single mowing. So if you let your turf grow to 3 inches, when it hits that 3-inch mark, you can have your mower blade set to 2 inches, and that's how much you'll take off. You only take off that 1 inch or that 1/3 of the total height. This is a great one. When you have new seedings, most people wait too long. Start mowing as soon as the seedlings are above the desired mowing height. This is going to be a little bit of tough love. It will help them grow better as they're maturing. It's going to toughen them up a little bit, and that's just going to help in the long run in terms of making sure that they are not getting too leggy, and that'll just help with your stand in general. All right, resources. I'm going back to the Purdue Turf website. As you can see, you have everything from homeowners, which I would highly, highly recommend you visit that on the Purdue Turf website. Turf professionals, that's more for golf course superintendents or maybe lawn care folks, but they do have fertilizer calculations. What I'm concerned about right now is this great tool, the GDD tracker, which stands for Growing Degree Day. And what that is you can plug in your location. So I plugged in Wabash County zip code, and I've got it clicked for spring broadleaf. Now what this is doing is it's telling me when I can apply esters, ester amines, or amines. Those are different broadleaf herbicides, and it's going to give you a rate. So it's in the tan right now. This was taken April 16th when I prepared the PowerPoint, but if you were to go out and spray or to check this map, you would say that you're too early for spring broadleafs on April 16th. And then same with crabgrass pre-emergent. So this was April 14th, and it said that as of April 14th, anything that is orange or gray is late on their applications. Again, we've got our location in Wabash, crabgrass pre, but you have to be careful. We did get a cold snap, and there is this other tab on your right side that is crabgrass germination. So this red box right there. And the crabgrass germination, if it's still early for crabgrass germination, what this means is we might have had a few warm days in previous months, but the crabgrass hasn't germinated yet. So that just tells me that if you haven't gotten your crabgrass pre-emerged by the 16th, you could still put it out with the fertilizer. You just might not get quite as good control. So I'm going to try something real quick. I'm going to hope this works. Can you guys see the internet screen okay?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm clicking on the crabgrass pre, and so it is done or a little bit late. But one thing I'm going to look at is this crabgrass germination, and because we've had cooler temperatures, this yellow area we're early. So crabgrass might be germinating on the southern part of the state, but in the middle part, if you can get out today or tomorrow, we're looking pretty good. So this is the May 7th Growing Degree Day. And this is, again, you can find the link on Purdue, but Michigan State's the one that puts it on. It's a really good resource to have. A lot of these you won't need to use, but they do have good information. All right, how do I get back to my PowerPoint? Okay, we good?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, thanks. So observing turf issues, it looks like we are getting close to our half-hour seeding rates. When you are seeding, you need to make sure you water frequently and a little amount of water to keep it moist. If you have an established lawn, you're going to be wanting to do a deep and infrequent watering because you want those roots to go down for their water. Weeds we'll be discussing next week, so we'd really like you to join in for that. Diseases are another thing that we might cover on our last Lunch and Learn series, and then pests, that'll be a big one. I added this picture on the right. I was golfing in Lafayette and we got up to the eighth green the eighth green. And I texted my professor, who's the extension specialist for Indiana turfgrass. And I said, what weed is this? So we gave him a wide berth and he eventually crawled away, but there's always things. Turtles are one thing if you have a water feature, but moles and grubs and things, that might be stuff that we cover in a later session. So just a review, things to consider when you're looking at your lawn. Your expectations, know what you're looking for. Some people are okay with weeds, some people are not. Your environment, the biggest thing there is going to be shade, but also moisture, and then soil conditions, seeding, using that tool that we had, making sure that you're knowing your expectations, figuring out the shade, and then picking a good seed variety that works well for you. I will say for Indiana, if you get a Midwest mix, which is typically a little bit of ryegrass, and then quite a bit of fescue, and then a little bit of Kentucky bluegrass, that one tends to do really well. But if someone wants lower inputs, I'm going to consider a turf type, or going to advise a turf type tall fescue, because that is going to do really well during drought and needs very little inputs. And then maintenance. So we sort of touched on fertilizer, watering, and mowing. And again, those are things that you need to consider when you are choosing your seeds, because you don't want to end up shorting yourself in terms of where you're going to be able to work with your turf. If people do decide to use sod, you need to clear your schedule for at least 3 weeks, because I would never trust your irrigation system unless you have someone you trust really well, because anytime you sod or seed, you're going to need to be in control of that water. And I've heard way too many stories about, well, the irrigation timer didn't go off and we lost all the sod, or someone didn't come in and didn't take care of the seeds. So whenever you're doing a new lawn installment, I always tell people that, they need to be the ones responsible, and try not to schedule any vacations, because a lot of times that's where you have a hard hit, where things don't get checked on for a week or two at a time, and that's when things can go south. So I'm looking at my clock and it looks like it's 12:59. I'm going to stop sharing.
We have several questions, Jeff, if you're ready for those.
I am ready.
Okay, so first one then, Susan asked, and I know it's a popular question, beehives, and they have haven't treated the grass for dandelions in 3 years now. They and other broadleaf weeds are starting to take over. Do you have any ideas for bee-safe lawn care?
So with the bees, what I tell people is a couple of things. If you are planning on spraying your lawns, go out and try to cut the flowers off, like try to mow those flower heads off. I know a lot of time clover comes out and the bees really like that. So it's going to be a timing issue too. The bees are usually going to be foraging. It's my understanding they do quite a bit in the morning, and then they sort of slow down at night. So you could spray your weed killer in the evenings. The other thing too is, if you can, the best time to spray for weeds, and we'll get into this next week, is in the fall. So when those bees are not quite as active. So if you spray in the fall, typically your dandelions are not blooming, your clover's not blooming. And so I always suggest, or typically suggest, spraying for those broadleaf weeds in the fall. Did that answer that okay?
I think that's great. Next one then, can preen be used to prevent crabgrass from germinating?
This is one of those questions where it depends on what you're using. When people say preen, there's a lot of different stuff out there. So you need to look at the label and make sure. Typically you'll have a list of what it controls. If it says crabgrass on there, by all means use it, but also look, a lot of those preens are made for flower beds and not necessarily for lawns. So you have to be real careful, and that's a label issue, where making sure you're reading it, it's pretty tedious, but making sure you're reading back to front, or front to back, the whole thing, to make sure that it should be used on lawns.
Perfect. Next one then. I know this happens a lot. Someone asked, how do you get grass to grow in lawns where trees have been removed?
Stump removal is a big one. The other thing is time is a big one. You really need to make sure that your soil bed is prepared correctly. When you say trees, I'm thinking of that pine tree that has a dozen of those roots that stick out 2 or 3 inches above the ground. They're gnarly. They make the lawnmower bump up and down. In a perfect world, you could remove all those roots and get as much of the stump out as possible and work the soil. But getting rid of the tree is good, step number 1. Step number 2 is making sure that soil bed is prepared because it probably hasn't been touched because it's been under a tree for a while. So that's what I'm going to say on that one.
Okay, awesome. When is a good time to use weed and feed on grass to remove creeping Charlie and wild strawberries?
So weed and feed is good. It's a good product. If you have creeping Charlie or ground ivy or wild strawberries, you are going to need something extra because those are very hard to control weeds. I would say use your weed and feed more as a way to bulk up your turf, and then you're going to need to look for something to spray on that creeping Charlie, the wild strawberry in the fall. And that is something, please join us next week because I have a lot of good information on that. We didn't have much time to get into it today, but I've got a few good slides on our ground ivy control because that is the devil incarnate. I'll just put it that way. So, and then I'm going to add my, I have added my email address to the chat box. So feel free to email me with questions. If you do email me though, I would like, your name, where you're from, and then kind of like think the different things we talked about, like what sort of area are you looking for, what history, what weeds. But I just wanted to throw that in there real quick. Any more questions, Corey?
Oh yeah, there's several more. And I have to echo your thoughts on creeping Charlie and all that being the devil. That's one of the calls I get the most and have to tell people to just stick with it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Nope, you're fine.
I was going to say, I've got some good slides on that for next week. So we'll get that taken care of.
Perfect. So Julie said a public park never planted grass and let weeds take over. Now they mow the weeds. This creates a problem with weed seeds blowing into a master garden or rain garden. I recommended eco grass initially. Is it worth overplanting some kind of turf now?
Depending on the area, if it's an infestation that's very well established, it would. Now, sorry, are you talking about the area with the weeds or the garden? I'm sorry.
I took it as the garden, but I don't know.
Okay. In gardens, you'd be better off with a mulch than planting a grass because that grass is going to use water. It says the area with the weeds. Okay. So the area with the weeds, if it's very well established in weeds, meaning like 75% weed coverage or more, it would be worth killing those off and restarting because grass usually needs a foothold before it can start out competing weeds. If you just put seed out there, those weeds are going to choke them out. And I just don't see that as being a very, there's not a good chance that that grass is going to out compete those weeds without a little help from herbicides.
Perfect. I know we've talked about this in previous things, but the next question is a handheld store-bought pH meter okay to use on lawns?
I've never used them before, so I do not know. I usually, when I need an area checked, I will send it into the lab, mostly because I'm looking for more than just the pH. I can look into that and get back with everyone on that one.
Can I throw in that if you're already going to do a soil test, I find it very helpful that if you do your soil test and then you take, the pH of your lawn using one of those store-bought ones, when the results come back, you can check because a lot of times those pH meters, depending on which one you get, some of them are, I have seen multiple soil tests where they do come back very, very close or if not very similar on ranges.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Somebody asked about the best way to eliminate creeping Charlie and from invading the turf, and we are going to cover that next week. I think Jeff will be back to talk about that, so I'm going to save that question for next week. The next question, Jeff, how do you get grass to grow in a full sun area that is extremely wet in the spring?
Extremely wet in the spring. So again, kind of depending on the area, if it's moist there, I don't know if this is at the bottom of a hill or if it's really bad clay or what's going on. If it's got moisture there, there are some ways you can go about it. Seeding it and seeing how, now if, again, I'm imagining a puddle. So if it's that bad, you need to put in some sort of drainage. But if it's just moist every spring, then what you might just be needing to do is seed it, find a turf grass that can tolerate the wetness in the spring. Whoever had that question, if you want to email me, I could see if I could find a list of different things, or maybe if you could send me some pictures, because that's one of those where you would kind of need to see the environment to figure out what you're dealing with. It just helps out, because I don't want to send you in the wrong direction with that. I will say just a bit of information when folks come to me where they have a lot of shade or it's very wet or something, mixed with the shade, I have advocated for putting in a flower bed, because sometimes that works out better and will look cleaner than putting in turf that just doesn't look very good or very clean. So there's a lot of different things you can do with that area.
Awesome. Next one. Sarah Brown said that she seeded spots in her yard or in the lawn this spring. Does she need to cover those small spots tonight for the freeze? Is it beneficial at all?
That's going to be up to you. The most I would do is put some straw down. If you have straw bales, just get some down there. Depending on when you put that seed down, it should be okay because it has been outside for a while. If you planted or if you seeded it last week, you will definitely be fine because it probably hasn't germinated yet. So depending on where it's at, it should be okay for the freeze. But yeah, the most I would do is put some straw down in those areas.
Kathy says, how do you identify and prevent rabbit nests in your lawn to avoid damaging something else? I don't know what we're damaging, but something.
So rabbit nests usually aren't in the turf. They're going to be in the landscape beds, wood piles, and things like that. I'd be more concerned if it was a mole or a groundhog. Again, I've never seen a rabbit's nest, but there are rodents out there that do take a hit. I would say to prevent those, you can always get some, there are some deterrents, some things you apply to your lawn that need to be reined in. So the moisture will put it into the soil, it smells real bad, and then the pests it dissuades them from entering your lawn.
Perfect.
Sorry, can I add one thing on the rabbits? So I live in the country and I do get rabbit nests in my yard, but the thing with that is that they're taking advantage and building their nests in areas where I already had a hole or an indent in the lawn. So I have found that if I try to go around the property and make sure that there's not already divots that maybe my dog has dug or previous mole feeding tunnels, that the rabbits aren't going to take advantage of that as much.
Thanks, Amanda.
Next question. Gail says she has a shallow septic tank and the grass doesn't grow well at all there, but the weeds do grow well. I have the same problem because we just put a new septic system in too, so I'll be anxious to hear the answer. Is there anything you can suggest?
So for that one, what you're dealing with is maybe not enough soil for that grass to grow in. Maybe it's compacted. The best thing, you can take it on a couple different levels. You can keep seeding it and hope some species takes. You can always supplement it. If you pick perennial ryegrass, that would be a good filler if maybe you have a bare spot, because the perennial ryegrass will grow pretty quickly. That's kind of a difficult one because one, you're not going to have much traffic there, but you also don't want to do too much over the septic tank. That'd be one, too, where maybe throwing a little bit of either compost or manure top dressing it so you can get a little bit more soil, and then adding seed to it. But that's kind of a difficult one with that, because those turf or those grass plants are not, they don't have as much soil to work with.
Kay asked, how can I make squirrels quit digging in the lawn?
Get a dog. That's what I tell people, but squirrels are one of those that they dig in lawns, they dig in flower beds. They're just a true pest. I'm not sure. Amanda, did you have anything on that? Because you had some good stuff with rabbits. I don't know. Do you have anything with squirrels in lawns?
Yeah, not in the home lawn. That's just a tricky one. And especially if you have a lot of trees around that are going to be dropping nuts or seeds, they just really, I do not have anything.
So yeah, that's one where, again, they'll be a nuisance for a while. We just have to kind of deal with.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on aeration and lawn rolling?
I really like aeration. It's good for soil compaction. If you have a thatch layer, it's really great. It is a little intensive. It might be expensive to get the machine out there. Lawn rolling is good if you want to push down your molehills and other things. But if anyone asks me about lawn rolling, I tend to ask them, why are you lawn rolling? And if they say it's because, you know, their dad did it, their grandpa did it, I'm like, well, that's not a good enough reason for me, because a lot of times it's just smushing the wet soil down. And so we talked about soil compaction a few weeks ago. If you have a sandy lawn, or if you're a golf course, then there is benefits to lawn rolling. But a lot of times, I always question people on what their reasoning for it is. It does work for some things, but in the long run, I'm not sure what I see in it. And other folks will say different things with that. But yeah, that's what I've got for lawn rolling.
Another question, how does somebody get rid of poison ivy in a host garden and flower garden without killing the plants and hurting the bees?
So that's going to be another spray in the fall when your flowers are kind of going into dormancy, the bees aren't as active. And then I would use a herbicide, but I would use it extremely carefully, meaning if you can get a handheld thing, something like a Windex sprayer, and hit just the leaves of the poison ivy. If you do that and you're careful with it, you should be fine. Poison ivy is one of those things that even if you spray it, you know, also be careful. The oils are still going to be there. So I'd spray with a herbicide and spray it very, very carefully.
I think so far that's the last of the questions.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys joining us today, and I believe we're going to be talking about the weeds next week, and so that'll have some good information. I'll try to wrap it up a little quicker so we have some more time for questions, but appreciate everyone being here. Thank you, guys.